And in all but the smallest situations, ladies and gentlemen, the law requires that contracts be in writing to be enforceable. So, mowing the lawn, a minor matter, requires an agreement, but doesn't necessarily have to be in writing. But hiring a company to build a house, a major matter, requires the contract to be in writing. Now, this also makes sense. This rule is designed to prevent someone from fraudulently claiming that you made a huge contractual promise to them. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Not coincidentally, this protective law is known as the Statute of Frauds. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Justice for All, the Wyatt Wright Show. On this program, we point out and talk about the ever-increasing disappearance of our American rights. So, requiring the parties to agree on the terms of a contract is elementary, right? I mean, look, if you don't agree, there can be no enforceable contract. If you were selling your car, you and I might negotiate over price, but unless I agreed to pay you a certain amount and you agreed to accept that same amount, there's no deal. I can't force you to accept $5,000 for your car, and you can't force me to pay $6,000 for your car. But once we do agree and sign an agreement, then we have what's known in contract law as a meeting of the minds. This is important, the meeting of the minds. It means that we're both on the same page, and we both understand the agreement in the same way. In the case of the car, it means that we both understand and agree what the final price will be. Why am I spending so much time on a simple concept? Because we're getting ready to talk about a Texas Supreme Court case that will make your head spin. A completely nonsensical, reprehensible, agenda-laden opinion that defies all sense of logic. The logic used by the Supreme Court in the case we're getting ready to talk about would hold that only one person is necessary to form a contract. Using that logic, a person could knock on your door tomorrow, tell you he just mowed your lawn, and demand $50. And under that reasoning, you'd be forced to comply. The heck, you say? This is America. This is Texas. Nobody can force me to do something I don't want to do. That's hogwash. I didn't agree to it. I didn't sign it. It didn't happen. Well, I would have agreed with you before, but guess what, ladies and gentlemen? The Texas Supreme Court says you're wrong. And while we weren't watching, they stuck their feet in our soup and rewrote Texas contract law to favor big business over individual Texans. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Justice for All, the Wyatt Wright Show. In this program, we point out and discuss the ever-increasing disappearance of our American rights. Well, let me tell you how this happened. Have you ever heard of mandatory arbitration? Arbitration is a system for resolving disputes outside of the court system and without a jury. It allows a hired person to hear the dispute between you and somebody else and make a decision that is binding on everybody. It's sort of like a private judge for hire. Now, it's not always a bad thing, but the thing about arbitration is that if you agree to it, you are giving up your constitutional right to have a jury decide your case. And I can see cases where you would want to do that. But the key, ladies and gentlemen, is that this right can only be given up if you agree to give it up in a contract. You have to have a writing that you agree to give that up in a contract. We're back to the meeting of the minds analysis we talked about earlier. Arbitration is just fine as long as both parties willfully, knowingly, purposefully, and intentionally sign a contract agreeing to compel arbitration of any disputes between them. What would you say if a guy dumped a load of toxic waste on your front lawn? And when you took him to court, he got to force you to arbitrate and give up your right to a jury of your peers. You'd say, get lost. I never agreed to that. Well, be prepared to get steaming mad at what the Texas Supreme Court did to Texans' rights in a case called In Re Weekly Homes. You may have heard of Weekly Homes before. They're a mass producer of housing subdivisions all across Texas. The facts were simple. A 78-year-old widower named Vernon Forsting decided to have a home built, and he hired Weekly Homes to do it. There was much involved in the process. A lot of, you can imagine, buying a house. There's all sorts of things that have to go on in that process. The guy's 78 years old. What does he do? He asks his daughter Patricia to assist him. So she is the go-between. She helps him deal with Weekly Homes, back and forth. Remember, the man's 78 years old. All Patricia did was pitch in to help her dad, as any good child would do. That's what we'd expect. Mr. Forsting signed all the documents. He signed the contracts with Weekly Homes. He paid for the house. It was his house. One of those documents was a mandatory arbitration provision. That, of course, made him give up his right to a jury if Weekly Homes treated him wrong. Whether or not it was a good idea for Mr. Forsting to agree to arbitration is not the issue. That's not the issue. The fact is simply that it was there. The arbitration clause was in the contract that he signed. That's not in dispute. But ladies and gentlemen, his daughter Patricia never signed the contract. It wasn't her house. Well, there are numerous problems with the Weekly home after it was completed, and many repairs were needed. It's later that Patricia moved into the house to keep an eye on her dad, who had health problems. And it wasn't long before the problems with the home construction led to her being injured as well. Patricia brought a claim in court against Weekly Homes to recover for her injuries, and it was then that she got the bad news. And she brought the claim just as any injured guest in the home would do. But Weekly Homes said, "Hey, Patricia, even though you didn't buy the house, you never signed an arbitration agreement with us. You're bound by the arbitration clause." Well, the trial judge heard that argument and laughed. He remembered from law school that it requires two to tango in a contract, and he sided with Patricia and said, "There's no arbitration here." So the trial judge agreed and did it right. Said that was absurd. Weekly Homes took it to the appeals court. The appeals court said, "Weekly Homes, that's a ridiculous argument," and they refused to even hear the appeal. If you just tuned in, you're listening to Justice for All, the Wyatt Wright Show. Here we discuss and point out the ever-increasing disappearance of our American rights. And coming up, we're going to dive into the email bag to see what you say to me, so stick around for that. But taking away people's rights to go to court has been on the agenda of big business in the Texas Supreme Court for quite a long time. They weren't going to stop there, so Weekly Homes took the case all the way to Austin, Texas. And ladies and gentlemen, in an 8-0 decision, the Texas Supreme Court held that Patricia was bound by the arbitration agreement. Are you ready for this? She was bound by it because she helped her dad with some of the details in having the home built. Basically for being his helper, his right-hand man, his courier. Are you kidding me? Because she helped her dad, she is bound by his contracts? It's totally and completely absurd. Now, in this case, the Supreme Court was simply helping out a big business home builder and to prevent him from being liable in court for any damages. But ladies and gentlemen, here's the result. The result is that American contract law has been changed in the most ridiculous of fashions. So the mask is off, and we know that we have a state Supreme Court that is willing to completely unearth established law just to help out a mega corporation home builder. As a result, Texans will forever have to wonder, are they going to be held responsible for a contract that somebody else signs? Scary. And it should be. Time to reach into the mailbag and see what you have to say to me. Well, if you have something to say, shoot me an email. speakup@WyattWrightShow.com, speakup@WyattWrightShow.com, or log on to Facebook and shoot us a question over there on our Facebook page. Today we have an email from Thomas who writes, "I wish more people would really look into the background of folks they vote on instead of just listening to good sound bites." Thomas, this is an appropriate email at an appropriate time, and I'm glad you brought it up because I faced this recently. A man running for the Texas legislature knocked on my door and asked me to sign his petition and consider voting for him. I asked him what his platform was, and he explained to me that he wanted to cut spending and wasteful programs. And he also wanted to make Texas's economy stronger. I said, well, that sounds great. I mean, it sounds great. What programs do you intend to cut? And he says, well, the wasteful ones. Okay. And I said, well, how do you intend to make our economy better? He says, well, by making better decisions than those people who are already in office. And so I pressed him for some concrete examples, and he had none. But his clipboard was filled with signatures from those who were satisfied with only the sound bites that he had to offer. So even though this gentleman lacked substance in that arena, I can't fault my neighbors for wanting something better. I mean, I do too. But ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that a little investigation before we go to the ballot box might go a long way. Just a reminder, you're listening to Justice for All, the Wyatt Wright Show. We're talking about the disappearance of our American rights. Ladies and gentlemen, our laws are being pulled apart. They're being pulled apart, piece by piece, by justices and lawmakers who've forgotten what it means to be a human being. These folks are beholden to the big corporations that support them and the ones that put them into office. Rulings and laws that deliberately allow wrongdoers to escape liability as a stain on America. And if we don't hold people accountable for their actions, and that includes mega corporations, then the rule of law will mean very little indeed. Don't let it happen. Our children deserve better. We're going to have to wrap up this show, but as you go through your week, remember that it was Justice Learned Hand who so famously said, if we're to keep our democracy, there must be one commandment: thou shalt not ration justice. Have a good day, everybody. Visit us on Facebook and click like. Come on over to the iTunes store and get the podcast as well. We'll see you next time right here on The Wyatt Wright Show.